I'm an alcoholic. I'm also a drug addict. I'll do everything I can to keep that drug talk out of this meeting, out of respect for Alcoholics Anonymous and my sponsor, the people who laid the foundation for Alcoholics Anonymous to be what it is today. My sobriety date is November the 5th, 1998. I was a hopeless drunk and a hopeless junkie. And that wasn't my first visit to Alcoholics Anonymous, y'all. You know, I came in 1994 through a treatment center, just as hopeless, just as helpless, just as homeless in 1994 as I was in 1998. I guess I'm here tonight to tell you what I was like, what I'm like today, what happened. You know, I really like to follow the outline that's in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous because it's the only thing that saved my life. I know what I'm supposed to do here on page 29. I believe, my sponsor has drilled this into me that, each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God, and it repeats that again on page 50 in the book. I'll talk a lot about the book, and I know that bothers some people. It says, in our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. And, I try my best today to live by the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know that a lot of people say that it's old, man. It's 85 years old, 84 years old. We got this book on April the 10th, 1939, and, we're millennials now, and, this thing's a little bit outdated, but I believe that the guys that I sponsor and the way my sponsor taught me and the way Frank's sponsor taught me and, early on, and if I follow exactly what's in the book, then I'll beat the game of drinking on a permanent basis. And, it's the last thing that I ever tried. The last thing I tried everything, y'all, to move around different things on the outside of my life and get sober and clean, and it was only temporary. The only thing that worked for me was the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and so I'll talk a lot about the book and talk a lot about the steps. And what I won't do, and I promised Brad and I promised Frank that I won't stand up here for 45 minutes and talk about a drunk-a-law, because I think everybody here knows how to drink. Everybody knows how to get drunk, and that's not important. I've qualified myself as an alcoholic, just as it talks about in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a real alcoholic, the litmus test, when I met my sponsor on November the 5th, 1998, he asked me if I'd open the book to page 44, come about 4 lines down, and there's a litmus test there, and it says, if you ever want to stop drinking and you find that you can't quit entirely, or when you start drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, then you're probably alcoholic, and he asked me what that meant to me, and He asked me, he said, "What does that mean to you, Mike?" And I told him I didn't know. And he said, "That's a damn good answer," So, I'm not a polished speaker. I think Brad probably could have got a much better speaker to come here tonight. And, I've cleaned up pretty well. When I got here in 1998, I was strung out. I was 140 pounds. I had blisters all over my lips, and my fingers were all just raw, and some people can identify with that, and I was drinking wine, I was drinking anything I could drink, I was hopeless, and when I met my sponsor on November the 5th, 1998, I looked at him, and we talked, and he sat right there with me. He sat right there with me at the Sandalwood group. He was a big book teacher, and he sat there with me that night for about 3.5, 4 hours, and we talked, and he let me cry. And I looked at him, and I said, "Carl, I just don't think that Alcoholics Anonymous is going to work for me. It had never worked before." And he looked at me, and he said, "Mike," he said, "Alcoholics Anonymous does not work because of you. Alcoholics Anonymous works in spite of you, He said that it's the only solution that we have, It's the only solution that we have. And So I went on to tell him, I'll jump around a lot, y'all, and I went on to tell him my experience. He wanted to know what I had done in Alcoholics Anonymous. He's a good listener, and he listened to me, He let me talk. He just let me talk, and he listened. I didn't know at the time he was gathering information, And that's what he was doing. I tell people my sponsor's a West Point graduate. He's a retired military officer. He's a psychiatrist in the Army, and he worked with alcoholics and addicts for 20 plus years in the military. And a bright man, smart man, authored a couple of books. But I asked him that night what he did for a living, and he said, I work with drunks, Mike. That's what I do for a living. I said, nah, man, I was trying to size him up. We come here, we'll size people up and see what they are, what they're made of. I said, Carl, no, what do you do for a living, man? He said, Mike, I work with drunks. And I said, come on, man. He said, what do you mean? Well, Mike, what do I do for money? He said, that's over there, Mike. That doesn't matter here. What I do for a living is I work with alcoholics, and I never forgot that, and I, at this time, I had been through about 3 treatment centers, 3 or 4 detox centers, and I was telling him he wanted to know what I'd done, and I told him everything that I thought that I'd done, and he wanted to know what makes you an alcoholic. You've had all these treatment centers you're talking about. What is alcoholism? What makes you an alcoholic? And I told him everything I'd done, and he said, Mike, none of that makes you an alcoholic. None of that stuff. Losing your wife, losing your job, losing your child, losing everything. None of that makes you an alcoholic, And he started to explain alcoholism to me just as it starts in the front of the book, just like it does in the doctor's opinion, And really it talks about a common problem here in Alcoholics Anonymous, that everybody in this room has one thing in common, and that's the first drink of alcohol. And what happens when we start to drink alcohol? You walk through that door, it doesn't matter what my title is, what my rank is, what my financial status is. None of that stuff matters here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I thought that it did, And he told me that, I told him what I'd done, y'all, and he said, Mike, you've been working the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. You haven't worked the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't understand what that meant, y'all. I really didn't. I remember, when I came in, I've got a college education for what it's worth. I can't use it, but I got a college education, and I told my sponsor that I thought I was smart enough to get it, and that I told him I had an education. I had a college degree, and he looked at me and he said, Mike, son, thermometers have degrees, and you know where they stick those, So I think that, I've had the same sponsor for over 22 years, and I tell you, I don't think he ever read that section of the book on the bottom of page 84 where it says love and tolerance of others is our code. So, he wanted to know exactly what I had done, which was very little. What I had attempted to do to treat my alcoholism. And one of the things that I had done, I tell this story, and I was drunk, and I was sitting in front of my television one night, and my family, a lot of my grandmother's side of the family are Pentecostals, okay? And I would see those Pentecostals drinking, and I knew they were drinking alcohol, and I knew what it was doing, and I would ask my grandma, what's going on with Uncle such and such? What's going on with Aunt such and such? My grandma would always say, Mike, they're in a backslidden condition, She wouldn't call them alcoholics or drunks, She'd say they're in a backslidden condition, and I always remembered that, and I remember some of my mom's side of the family going to like these tent revivals. These young, they might have them here. They have them a lot in Fayetteville. They set up these big tents, and they have these revivals. And I remember y'all sitting in front of the TV, and there was a real famous one in Fayetteville out in Graves Creek. His name was Charles Young. He's an Indian man. He had a big afro, and he was a spitting just a 5-syllable kind of evangelist, and he said on there, he said, I'm bringing my tent to your town, if you have a problem, you bring your problem down to my tent, and I'll heal your problem. And I wanted to get sober, y'all. I didn't understand alcoholism, and I didn't understand drug addiction, I didn't understand the mental obsession and the allergy and why my life would get better, and I'd always go back to drinking and drugs. So I said, I'm going to try to go to this thing Saturday night. I'm going to try to stay sober all day Saturday and go to this thing and see if I can get healed, And I had this DWI court case that was really just bothering me, y'all. It was just really heavy on me, and I had a court hearing coming up, that Tuesday, and so I didn't stay sober. About 5 or 6 o'clock, I went down to this thing, and I sat in the back, and I saw, the preachers and the deacons just laying hands on people, and I went down front, and I finally got the courage to go down front, and the guy said, "Son, what is your problem?" And I said, "Sir, I got a hearing." And I didn't get the rest of it out of my mouth, and they put their hands all over me and just all over my ears, and they were just preaching and spitting, and the deacons came down, and and they went on and on and on, man, and he said he pulled his hands off my ears, and he said, "Son, how's your hearing now?" And I said, "I don't know. It ain't till Tuesday." So I was reaching, y'all. I was trying, and I was a hopeless alcoholic, y'all. So anyway, I was raised by a good mom and dad, and my mom and dad, we got to Fayetteville, North Carolina. My parents were railroad people. My daddy was a railroad engineer. My mom was a railroad clerk for CSX, which was Seaboard Coastline at the time. And my dad would get bumped, and he would drive over here to Hamlet and work. And my mom had a permanent job in Fayetteville at Byland Yard. But so my mom and dad were railroad people. They didn't drink. They didn't do drugs. I just wasn't raised around it. Kenny, my friend Kenny in the red shirt, he's been a part of my business for 21, 22 years now, and he knows my mom and dad were just good people, They didn't raise me like that, but I know now that it didn't have anything to do with who my mom and dad were, whether they were alcoholic and drug addict or not, So I was raised in a good home, went to a good school in Hope Mills, played football, baseball, and basketball at Southview, and graduated from high school, went to East Carolina on a baseball scholarship, and I got to East Carolina, and I just didn't know what to expect, y'all. I got there, and I just saw just a ton of women and a ton of girls and a lot of partying, and I didn't understand alcoholism. I knew something was going on, but I didn't understand alcoholism, and I made it 2 months and got a DWI, and hit a parked car, went to jail, and my mom, and I went to jail on a Friday night, would have been early Saturday morning, and my mom and dad were on a cruise. They couldn't come get me, so I'm in jail, and in Greenville, and man, I just nothing had happened to me like this before, and I always had a mom and dad that were there to take care of stuff for me, and I'd never been in any real trouble, never been in any drinking trouble, and I stayed in jail for about 3 days, and finally my parents came home. I was in jail. There's a bunch of messages on the answer machine, and they came right and got me out of jail, and they cleaned that mess up for me, y'all. I was asked not to come back to East Carolina, and I ended up at Methodist College, playing for Coach Austin at Methodist College, but my mom and dad cleaned that mess up for me, and for the next 3 or 4 years, my mom and dad cleaned up my mess. Any trouble I would get into, my parents would clean up that mess, I still don't understand alcoholism, y'all. I still don't understand what's going on. Just a series of bad luck, just a series of bad luck. Never suffered much. Mom and dad took care of a lot of stuff for me, and I just love to drink, and I love to party, and I love girls. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to drink, mess with girls, and pretty much in that order. If I worked a little bit, that's all right. whatever. But anyway, my parents got tired of it after a while and got me a job with the railroad. I went to work. My daddy had transferred to Amtrak and started driving for Amtrak and got me a job with Amtrak. And, things were going great, man. I moved to another city and put this old alcoholic drug life behind me, was able to get into something that cleaned me up and professional job, making good money at 23, 24 years old, and I'm in a different city. I'm in a different city by myself. And if you follow the theme in the book, one of the words that sticks out for alcoholics is loneliness. You'll see loneliness mentioned quite a few times, and my life would get better a lot of times because my mom and dad would do whatever it took to make my life better, and I'd get somewhere and I'd get lonely. I would get lonely, and I'd always turn back to alcohol. And I always turn back to alcohol. I have a mind that that I know that alcohol is bad for me, but I have a mind that can't process reality, y'all. And I got a body that can't process alcohol. Because I don't understand alcoholism. I don't know what's going on, I don't want to hurt these people. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to suffer I don't want the DWIs, okay? But I just can't. I don't understand alcoholism and drug addiction, And, it took somebody coming to me and sitting down to me, telling me their story that had depth and weight and just explained alcoholism to me as exactly what it is. The allergy, the mental obsession, the allergy of the mind, the allergy of the body, and what happens when I drink alcohol, I don't know that I ever heard that, all the treatment centers that I was going to, And one of the things that this book talks about is there's something more insidious going on inside of me than the problem of the mind and the problem of the body. I have a soul sickness. I have a sick soul, okay? I mean, the book talks about a spiritual awakening. And when I got here, y'all, I was spiritually asleep. I just didn't know. I didn't know about this power. Any mention of God. I was at a halfway house today and I was reading out of the big book with the guy, and we agnostics, and I knew there was a God. I knew I wasn't an atheist. I was just without knowledge, man. I just didn't believe that this God would love me and work with me and get me back to a healthy servant. I didn't believe all that. I never believed all that. I thought that the power of God was set aside for the good people in life. The goody people. The goody good people. And I wasn't one of them. I was a white trash, redneck, junkie, drunk that would steal my wife's purse while she was asleep and I'm crawling across the floor to get to it. Okay? That's the type of alcoholic and drug addict I am. You know what I mean? I'm the guy that'll abandon everything to go drink alcohol, to go get high, And, when I found this sponsor, I probably needed to go back to treatment. I probably did. But he looked at me and he said, "No, man." He said, "Leave that bed for somebody that's new. You know what you have to do, Mike. And he sat there with me that night, y'all, and told me his story. And I just asked him. I said, "Carl, how'd you do it? And if you can if you can tell an alcoholic your story, and you can get them to ask the magic question, Brad, how did you do it? Show me how you did it, man. Then, man, you got them. You got somebody that's ready." And at that time, in 1998, I was ready. I was just ready. What had happened, though, is I went and took a test to go to school to be an engineer for the railroad, for Amtrak, And I was 28 years old, and I left in August of 1998 to go to Chicago to engineering school for the railroad, and they're paying me $1,500 a week while I'm in school to be a railroad engineer for 6 months, okay? And I'm drinking a little bit. I'm kind of managing my drinking, and No drugs at all, no drugs at all. And in October, I was there about 3 months, and then the first 3 months you're in a classroom setting. And then the final 3 months, you're in the part of a classroom, but you're more on an engine and out in the yard, and you're moving engines, and you're learning everything about a railroad engine, an Amtrak engine, and you're learning about, because you don't know where you're going to go when you get out of school. So I'm either going to be up north of D.C., which is an electric engine, or I'm going to be south of D.C., which is a diesel engine. Okay, so you got to learn a lot of stuff. And one night I'm sitting at the bar there, and I'm drinking a couple of beers, and the guy mentioned something about marijuana, and I said, "Yeah, man, we'll go. Come on, I'll take you for a ride, smoke a joint." Okay, and I went with him, and I hadn't smoked marijuana in 2 years, y'all. And that was on a Sunday night. And that next morning, they're taking us from the classroom to on board the engine. And anytime you go around an engine or a plane or anything like that, they're going to drug test you. Okay? And so we have to take a random drug test that Monday morning. And man, I drew the number to take the random drug test. And I'm telling you what, man, I denied it, man. I ate a bagel that morning that had poppy seed on it. It was something, you know. And they said, and I failed that drug test that Monday morning. And they told me I could give a bottle of water. I denied. I could drink a bottle of water, and it test in an hour. Next time I had to pee. And so I sat there, y'all. And I drank that bottle of water, and they wanted the very next urine sample, okay? And man, I tell you what, that afternoon they flew me from Fayetteville to Chicago, but that afternoon I was on a train going back to Fayetteville, you know, and that was in October of 1998, and my mom and dad worked for the railroad, and I had a 10-month-old baby. I had a brand new house that we had just built. I had a brand new Ford F-150 truck that I had just bought, you know. And I came back to Fayetteville, and I lived in Fayetteville out and about like my wife didn't even know I was in Fayetteville. You know, she didn't know. I stayed out about 3 or 4 weeks living in the car, and I was using and drinking every day because I was driven by so much fear, you know. And, you know, early on in the book, it starts to, they spend so much time in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous giving you a fatal dose of alcoholism, you know. They spend the first third of the first 164 pages talking about step one, okay? They drill it into us step one, you know. Because, you know, look at all the treatment centers and jails and hospitals and loss that we go through just to admit step one, okay? I mean, if you can't get step one, you ain't never going to get sober. I mean, we go to jails and give up marriages and lose jobs and DWIs and all that and come back in just beaten and broken. And like I would, and then 30, 60 days later, they're looking at me like, "Mike, you drank again, man? Dude, you went out and got drunk again?" And so, you know, from early on in the book, you know, and I talk about it about every meeting I go to. Talk about being maladjusted to life and full flight from reality, outright mental defective, you know, restless, irritable, discontented, you know. It continues, and we don't talk enough about the rid that it talks about early in the book. You know, the restlessness, the irritability, and the discontentedness. You know, if you'd asked me when I got here to Alcoholics Anonymous in 1998 what killed alcoholics, I would have said whiskey and car crashes. You know, and I've sponsored enough guys today that I believe what kills alcoholics is being discontented, just not happy. Never happy with where we're at. I'm not happy with this girlfriend. I'm not happy with this job. They don't treat me right. They don't pay me enough. You know, they take me for granted. I don't have enough. You know, and you know, if you really study the book Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, and my sponsor told me this. He said, "Mike," he said, that Tuesday night, that I sat with him for 3.5, 4 hours, he looked at me and he said, Mike, he said, maybe it's not the alcohol that's the problem. Maybe it's not that little bag of cocaine that you're buying. Maybe that's not your problem. Maybe you're the problem. And I said, man, I'd never heard that put like that, y'all. He said, because if it's the alcohol that's your problem, or it's that little bag of cocaine that you're buying that's the problem, he said, you've been detoxed. He said, you go on and go. You don't need to be here anymore. But he said, if it's alcoholism that's your problem, you better stay right here. You know? And I can stop drinking, y'all. My problem ain't stopping drinking and drugs. My problem is that I always start back up. Because I have a mind that can't process reality. I always go back to restless, irritable, and discontented. I'm not happy with my life. And that's really the problem that they're talking about in the book, is that I'm powerless when I drink and I'm powerless when I'm not drinking. That's a damn dilemma. You know, that's a dilemma for people like me that's a real alcoholic. You know, something ain't right when you're drinking, and you're not right when you're not drinking. And that's the unmanageability that it talks about. See, I thought the unmanageability was I lost my wife, I lost my job, I lost my car, I'm broke, I'm bankrupt. That's not what they're talking about in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. The unmanageability that I fall into is the 9 bedevilments that come on page 52 in the book. That every area of my life I'm struggling in, okay? Whether I'm drinking or not drinking. In the doctor's opinion, it talks about there come a time when we can't differentiate the true from the false. And he's talking about alcohol there. That I cannot differentiate the true from the false concerning alcohol. Okay? That's insanity. Okay? That is insanity. Sanity is when I can differentiate the true from the false concerning a drink of alcohol. Okay? All right? Because my life ain't so damn unmanageable now. I'm starting to straighten out a little bit, you know? And I never could get that, y'all. I couldn't get that. I thought, it says in the book, should be about on page 61, and I'm not going to sit up here and quote pages out of the book all night, but on page 61, it says, that me as an alcoholic, I believe I can wrest satisfaction out of this world if I only manage well, you know? And the 12 and 12 should be about page 99 of the 12 and 12. It says that I'll sit in AA meetings and suffer the pangs of anxious apartness. Okay? That I'm suffering when I'm not drinking alcohol unless I move through the steps. Okay? And see, I didn't think I needed that stuff. I thought I was smarter than that. I said, step, sponsor, man, that's good for you guys. But I don't have to do all that work. I'm glad y'all do it, but I like meetings. I love AA women. I love AA meetings. I love it. I like the dances. And my sponsor knew me, y'all. He knew me. And he knew my character. Okay? And when I got here, he told me to stay away from the women. He said, you don't have anything to offer women. You stay away from women. And he said, that shit that's going on up here in your head, Mike, he said, don't share that shit in AA meetings. Okay? We don't want to hear it. He said, I'll let you know when you can talk in an AA meeting. And he said, when you come in an AA meeting, I don't want to see you sit beside a woman, and when we stop for the prayer after the meeting and hold hands, I don't want to see you hold a woman's hand. Because I love AA women. I like sick. The fresh, I remember y'all. I mean, 2 weeks out of detox, that's my girl. You know, I'm serious. Y'all. And you'll see them people around here, you know. I mean, and I was one of them, you know. And So anyway, I just tried to follow directions, and I usually went to meetings with my sponsor, or I met with him, and so I was at a meeting one night, and the topic was acceptance, and my sponsor wasn't there, and I knew that acceptance, and my sponsor, I knew that acceptance page, 417 in the book, 449 in the third edition, 417 in the fourth edition. Man, I knew it, and that was the topic, and my sponsor wasn't at that meeting that night. He didn't want me to share in the meeting, and man, I shared, and I caught eyes with this girl, good-looking girl, and I knew that was at least worth a cup of coffee. You know what I mean? Because I was going to ask her out. You know, hey, she was good. I always start at the top and let the market set the price. I just work my way down. You know, and I went up to ask her for her phone number, and I gave her my phone number, and it was a Friday night meeting at the One Day at a Time group, and I was pulling into the Oxford house, and my phone rang, y'all, and I said, man, look, she's already calling. She's already calling me. And it was my sponsor that called. And he said, I heard you shared in the fucking AA meeting tonight. That's what he said to me. And I've had the same sponsor. Kenny knows my sponsor. I've got a tough sponsor. He's an old 75-year-old man. I have little to nothing in common with him other than, we're both alcoholics, which was fine. It's the first time I've ever had a sponsor like that. And he's just been one hell of a good spiritual advisor for me. And, I don't think his job was ever to comfort me when I was afflicted. Maybe it was to afflict me when I was comfortable, And but he took me through the steps, y'all, and he took me through this book, He started to really talk about the spiritual malady, which was what I suffered from. I suffered a spiritual malady that is it's deep rooted inside of me, and it comes out through selfishness and self-centeredness, right? And I can't let you people know that. You know what I mean? Because I always want you to see my motives. You're watching my actions, but I want y'all to see my motives, and that's the little magic trick that I try to play all my life to get what I want, and that woman, I had a 10-month-old little baby in 1998, and that woman that was my high school sweetheart, she was beautiful, she was educated, her mom and dad are millionaires, and man, we met when we were 15 years old, and she was just my Miss Fayetteville. She was Miss Southview High School. She was just everything that a man would want, and she loved me, and I married her. I married the woman of my dreams, but that right there would not keep me sober. She divorced me in 1998, and I had a 10-month-old little baby, and my roommate in the Oxford house was an attorney in Fayetteville, a pretty powerful attorney. And I sponsored the guy today. You believe that? I sponsor him today. And Tom was my roommate, and I wanted to get some sort of custody rights to my child. And the only reason is because my sponsor made that important, and my family, and I don't mean to sound ugly, but I come from a family of deadbeat dads. I come from a family of alcoholics who abandon children, who just, the men in my family choose alcohol, drug addiction, or drug dealing. Kenny knows my whole family. I spoke one time, my brother was in federal penitentiary, my uncle was in a federal penitentiary, my other uncle's in federal penitentiary, my cousin's in federal penitentiary, all for dealing narcotics, okay? My Uncle Connie was, and my cousin Cindy, they were broken into out in Graves Creek and shot in the back of the head, execution style, in a drug deal gone bad, So this type of environment I'm familiar with, okay? All my cousins are screwed up, okay? They're all drug addicts and alcoholics. There ain't nothing pretty in my family except for my mom and dad, okay? Just good, solid, wholesome people. And that raised me to be a good person. But anyway, this woman divorced me in 1998, and I was able to get some custody rights to my child, but only if it was supervised, because I was never on solid ground when I was drinking, and I was never on solid ground when I was sober, okay, not drinking. And so I got some custody rights, and I went through the steps with my sponsor, and I met with him. And I met with him every time that we had an appointment. I met with him. And he read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous with me. He took the time to read the book and explain it. And he fit my experience inside of this book. He would always ask me, Mike, do you identify with that? Because he explained to me that the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is not about education or information. It's about identification. That's what this book is about. Not about education, not about information. He taught me the feel. He said that this book, because my sponsor's also an author. He said that the book Alcoholics Anonymous was written in what they call the feel, felt, found concept. Feel, felt, found concept. And if you don't understand that, they write a book that says, their experience says, I know how you feel. I once felt that way, but this is what I found when I took the actions, okay? And I didn't believe in the actions. I only wanted to know what the result of the action would be before I took the action, okay? That's how I live my life. I always have to know what I'm getting out of it before I ever do it. Yeah, I'll do it for you, Frank, but I need something out of it, okay? That's the selfishness and self-centered. And he'd ask me, he said, Mike, can you believe in the action? Don't worry about the result right now. Can you do the action? And the action is can I suit up and show up? Okay? Can you suit up and show up? Can you meet with me every week? If he gives me 3 pages to read, don't read 13 pages. Read 3 pages. There's a reason he's asking me to read 3 pages and not a whole chapter. I can't read a whole chapter, but I can read 3 pages day after day. And the next time that I meet with him, he wants to talk about the 3 pages. Okay? He don't want to talk about a bunch of other stuff. He don't want to talk about any relationship because he already knows that I'm the damn problem. Okay? He counsels so many military people, military officers all over the world, out of the Pentagon. He knows what I am, okay? I would try to talk to him, and he'd just listen and listen. And he'd say, Mike, are you trying to convince me of that shit, or are you trying to convince yourself of that shit? Because you're full of shit, you know? And I had nowhere to go. I had nothing left to do but what's in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know? I mean, I'm a drug addict, alcoholic, sex addict, man. There's 420 12-step programs, y'all. The only thing they do is play musical chairs with the first half of step 1 and who you help in step 12, you know? But I qualify for a bunch of them, you know? But in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm an alcoholic. I suffered from untreated alcoholism. And I sat in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings for years, suffering from untreated alcohol. Recovery ain't living in a halfway house. Recovery ain't going to bunches of meetings all week long. That's not recovery. He told me, he said, you want the good news about AA or you want the bad news about AA? What do you want first, Mike? And I said, give me the good news about AA. He said, open the book to page 59. We read it at every meeting. We read it tonight. And it says, here are the steps we took which are suggested as a program of recovery. He said, that's the good news. He said, you want the bad news? I said, sure. He said, they don't make any other suggestions. They don't make any other suggestions. The only suggestion that they make for us to recover from alcoholism is the 12 steps. The thing that I wouldn't do, I would never do that. I'll do everything else. But I ain't working no 12 steps. I ain't doing it. I don't have time to do it. I got a busy life, I'm busy, I'm busy. And what I did is I took a threefold disease, y'all. I took a threefold disease, alcoholism, a threefold disease, and I tried to treat each part separately, okay? I tried to treat the spiritual, I'd go see a preacher. I tried to treat the physical, I'd go to the gym. I'd join a gym. I'd get me a nutritionalist, spiritual, physical, emotional. I'd come here and how did I treat my emotional? I'd come in here and just bleed all over the table, tell you everything that's wrong with me, Pull out my cell phone and just look at my cell phone the rest of the meeting. And I did that one time while my sponsor was there, and he said, on the way home, he said, Mike, did you hear what Joe said? I said, oh, yeah. I come in, I wanted to got a sobriety threatening issue. Boy, I had them. I'll lay the topic out. I want to be the center of attention. I want to lay the topic out. And you hear what Joe said? Yeah, what'd Joe say? No, what Joe said. You hear what Diane said? Yeah, I heard what Diane said. And I didn't hear what anybody said because I had my cell phone out, flipping through my cell phone. And today, unless my daughter and my wife is on the road, I don't bring my cell phone into an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I take 1 hour, and I'm not saying this to be, point anybody out. If you got your cell phone, that's on you. But I'd leave my cell phone in the car for 1 hour while I'm in an AA meeting because I just need to be in an AA meeting and give my full attention to Alcoholics Anonymous. I need to make eye contact with everybody who's speaking, and I need to know what they say. See, I met a friend tonight that likes baseball, and I heard him talking about baseball. I talked to Brad this morning, talked to him about nutrition. I need to know what's going on in people's lives, and that has to be important to me. But anyway, y'all, in the last few months, I've remarried a woman that divorced me 21 years ago. 21 years ago, that woman divorced me, and she never remarried. And this little girl that was 10 months old, she just graduated from college, just graduated from Western Carolina University, and she's back there now working at a golf resort and working on her master's degree. And for 20 years I was single in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I wasn't always a good person. I have to treat other addictions, y'all. You know what I mean? And but what I did, y'all, is before I got married, I went and sat with a pastor who's a good friend of mine today. He's just been a good friend to me, and I'm not here to push that on anybody, but I was dating a girl, a good-looking girl, and I brought her here several times, and she was just, she ended up moving to Colorado with the military, and I just happened to talk to my pastor. I was going through some premarital counseling because I don't know how to have a relationship. I always live with women. I'm always having sex with women before I'm married to them. I'm always, it's like I want to hit the buffet, y'all. I want to hit the dessert bar. I want the dessert first. Okay? I want the dessert first, and then I'll go to the regular meal, because I'm selfish and self-centered. You know what I mean? And that's the way I run my life. And I said, well, Carl, I'm going to just move in with her, and I'll do it on a trial basis for a little while, And he said, no, I don't think that's a good idea. And so I started talking to my pastor, and he said, why don't you ask Amy to meet you for a cup of coffee? And you don't go to her house and don't let her come to your house, because I'm a manipulator. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to get her in the house, okay? Because that's what I do. I'm going to work my magic because that's what I do. I'm selfish and self-centered, okay? I suffer the spiritual malady that the book talks about. If you don't believe it, just go to 68, 69, 70, 71 in the book. They spend 3.5 pages talking about sex, okay? And the way I run my sex life, I want the satisfaction. I want to wrest satisfaction out of this world if I only manage well, right? So my pastor said, why don't we try 90 days of premarital counseling with no sex involved? And I'm like, holy shit, really? No sex? And he said, if you slip up, come back and talk to me, we'll start again. 90 days. I'm like, man, I don't know if I can do this yet. And what I lack is power. Remember, I lack power not only in dealing with alcohol, but I lack power in other areas of my life. And I don't like to follow directions, y'all. I like to do things my way. I hear what you say. I know that's a great suggestion. But my ways, and that's how I live my life, my whole life. My way is just a little bit better, you know, and she'll tell you, my wife is an Al-Anon girl. She stayed in Al-Anon since 1996. The first time I went to treatment, she's always sponsored Al-Anon women. There'll be an Al-Anon woman at my house tomorrow night. The whole 20 years that we were not married, and she worked with other women in Al-Anon that were just as broken as us sitting here tonight, you know. And she'll tell you the same thing. She struggled with it too, you know, and because most of us do. It says in the book, we all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't, okay? So, anyway, I'm remarried, y'all, and I'm remarried, and, you know, I just... you know, I'm less selfish today. You know, I prayed that I would not see my wife's rough edges. I prayed to ask God to help me to not see her rough edges, but just to see the goodness of it, you know. She knows what I do. I work with drunks. I have about 3 or 4 AA commitments a week, and I sponsor guys. I meet with Greg. We read the book. I meet with Rodney and Greg. We read the book. I read the book today with another sponsee. My wife lets me do that, you know. Because that's what I have to do. I think that sponsorship is the backbone of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, if you've got a sponsor that'll read the book with you, hold on to them because you got something. You know, if you have a sponsor that just says, "Hey, man, meet me at meetings. You know, we'll get together something." See, that's the kind of sponsor I like. One that did never hold me accountable. There was no responsibility, no accountability there. You know, I'm a paint contractor. You know, Kenny's worked for me for 21, 22 years. Been a great asset to my business. You know, I got a good education. I've just never used it. You know, I've always been in the construction business and painting business, and you know, and it's just been dynamite for me. You know, but that's what I do for money. You know, what I do for a living is I work with drunks, and it's the most important part of my life. Early on in the book, early on in the doctor's opinion, it says, we favor hospital. It says, though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as an altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization for the man who is jittery or befogged. So, how I'm going to work this out is through the spiritual as the steps, and the altruism is step 12. Okay, I have to be a selfless giver all the time. You know, I always tell Greg, you know, don't deny me the right to work my 12th step. You know, don't deny me the right to work step 12. I need to be working with drunks. I need to be picking drunks up. You know, I got involved with a group of military guys out at the AM Antioch program with Fort Bragg. That's a program where the Army treats drug addicts and alcoholics, sends them off to treatment to Fort Gordon or up to the PTSD clinic in Richmond or Fort Lee and Wilmington Treatment Center, and we kind of intercept those guys when they get back to Fort Bragg, and that's been big for me in the last couple of years. So I don't have anything else to say. I'm grateful to be sober. Thank y'all for being here tonight.